All right, then welcome everyone to tonight's lecture with Professor Yohei Kageyama. This is gonna done as a hybrid lecture. It's a lecture in our society's lecture series, Society for Intercultural Philosophy lecture series, as well as an in-person lecture here at Tübingen University as part of our research colloquia. And I'm particularly glad to welcome Kageyama Yohei here with us tonight. So very warm welcome to you. And let me briefly introduce Professor Kageyama to you. So he's professor of philosophy at Kwansei Gakuin University in Japan. He has been trained in phenomenology in Tokyo and Wuppertal, and having published several articles, primarily on Heidegger as well as on French phenomenology and Hegel, he began studying the history of modern Japanese philosophy. So his overall research interests then include phenomenological ontology and the history of contemporary philosophy, focusing on the historical plurality of phenomenological experience. From 2019 to 2021, he served as a member of an international research project entitled Becoming of Philosophy in East Asia at the International Research Center for Japanese Studies in Kyoto. And currently he is studying in Coventry, UK as a visiting professor at the University of Warwick. Since 2022, Professor Kageyama has been working with scholars from China, Korea, the Philippines, and Iran for the Heidegger Circle in Asia, which will also take place this year in Rome. As probably all of you know, this year's World Congress in Philosophy is taking part early August in Rome. Yes. So gonna meet you there again.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's nice.
That's nice.
Start discussion tonight and continue there. And with this, welcome everybody again, and the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Okay, so at first, I will share my manuscript on the screen. Yeah. Okay. So, and first and foremost, so I would like to thank Niels and the staff of the College of Fellows for giving me the honor of delivering this talk at these beautiful universities with such a great tradition. Yeah, really great tradition. So, maybe the most famous tradition, yeah, in the world, I think. Okay, so I will read out my paper. My philosophical training began with Western phenomenology, particularly with Heidegger. Today, however, I will focus on the Japanese philosopher Kitaro Nishida and discuss his position on one of the fundamental problems of phenomenology. Fundamental problems of phenomenology, namely the concept of the world. In other words, I will examine Nishida's philosophy from my perspective as someone who was born and raised in East Asia, but studied in Western philosophy first. The phenomenological concept of world is broadly defined as a universal referent for all horizons of experience. However, universal does not mean a giant bag like this, so giant bag containing countless entities. To borrow an expression from Marx Gabriel, the phenomenological concept of the world is not a field of sense that, that encompasses all fields of sense, but an openness that allows for an endless plurality of fields of sense. A play space in German would be Spielraum, so to speak. For example, Klaus Held, in an article dedicated to Heinrich Lombard, emphasized the world as an openness that gives space to the horizons of the appearance of things. Laszlo Tenge, he's my teacher, so Laszlo Tenge, building on Cantor and Husserl, also advocated a concept of world that includes not only the uniformity of the continuum of appearances, but also the openness of the continuum to total transformation. Nevertheless, it is precisely this openness of the world that creates tension within phenomenological philosophy. As Hertz cites the Cora in Plato's Timaeus, the openness of the world is made possible by the world itself withdrawing, and this is the point, withdrawing from appearance and becoming empty. So he used the term empty. The Heideggerian expression, phenomenology of the invisible, so in German, so Phänomenologie des Unscheinbaren, thus suggests that the concept of the world demands us to reflect on the possibility of philosophy about and within what shows itself, namely the phenomenon. Kitaro Nishida never defines himself as a phenomenologist. However, he takes a unique position on these tensions inherent in the openness of the concept of world. Here is a quotation that shows the importance of the concept of world to him. Nishida's first book, An Inquiry into the Good, was published in 1911, and in the preface to the 1936 reprint, he wrote, I quote, "The standpoint of pure experience developed into the idea of praise. The idea of praise became concrete with dialectical universal, and the standpoint of dialectical universal has been transformed into the direct standpoint of active intuition. What was being called the world of direct and pure experience in this book, namely, so An Inquiry into the Good, is now considered the world of historical reality." End of quote. Nishida's fundamental concepts from his early to late period are listed in order here, and their development is reviewed as they relate to the concept of world. As I will return to later, soon, given that Nishida's starting point, namely the concept of pure experience, this starting point is regarded as a fact that precedes epistemological reflection. There are solid clues here for a dialogue with Western phenomenology. This is because for both Husserl and Heidegger, world is a constitutive element of Urfakticity. How then does his conception of the world develop exactly? In what follows, we will examine this aspect of Nishida's relationship to the openness of the phenomenological world concept. Through this work, we will consider the particularities of Nishida's philosophy, broadly characterized by the keyword absolute nothingness. In 3 sections, we will focus on Nishida's text from the early, middle, and late periods, respectively. First section, we begin with the concept of pure experience, which is the starting point of Nishida's philosophy. In today's philosophical vocabulary, pure experience represents a state of direct contact, so would be direct realism, Kent van Zagen, so direct contact between the mind and the world, prior to any epistemological skepticism and representational consciousness. The example Nishida gives is of a person desperately climbing up a rock face, so like this. So when one is selflessly clinging to the rock face and reaching upwards, one cannot doubt whether the rock wall in front of one's eyes is real outside of subjective consciousness. The rock wall is not something that appears to subjective consciousness, but exists simply there. There is no distinction between the inside and outside of consciousness, but only an inseparable interplay between the mind and the world, which is desperately climbing up the rock wall. Such idea itself is not necessarily unique to Nishida. In Japan, in the philosophy of the Meiji period, which preceded Nishida's work, the Zen monk Tanzan inspired his students in the University of Tokyo to appropriate Buddhism from the background of Western philosophy, which the Japanese had just begun to learn. Two of these students, Enryo Inoue and Tetsujiro Inoue, followingly discussed the experience of subject-object fusion, which precedes epistemological reflection. Nishida, in a sense, inherited the achievement of Meiji-era philosophy that preceded him and formulated his own concept of pure experience, laying the foundation for the Kyoto school that followed. Internationally, too, philosophers around the world were working on similar ideas, just as pure experience was originally a term borrowed from William James. In Phenomenology, Heidegger speaks of pre-theoretical experience in the concluding part of his habilitation already, influenced by the late Neo-Kantian Emile Rast. And even Husserl, so philosopher of Epoche, even Husserl speaks of the Urfakt of the world in the late text. However, a curious feature of Nishida's philosophy is expressed in the way he captures this phase of experience, which phenomenologists call facticity. It concerns the unity, so this is the point, the unity of pure experience as a whole in each moment or instance. Nishida agrees with James' criticism of classical empiricism that the relations between experiences are also experienced. But Nishida criticizes James for overlooking the unity of the passive and spontaneous synthesis of experience itself. Nishida describes this unity, for example, as follows, I quote, "There are neither things nor self. Only the real cosmos, in Japanese, tenchi jitsuzai, is at work," end of quote. There is no distinction between the rocky thing and the climbing self. There is only the real that manifests and becomes as pure experience. This is very alien to phenomenology, which is anchored in the concept of facticity. However much Heidegger opposed representationalism in being and time, the ontological distinction between Dasein and the interworldly entities like forehandedness and two-handedness is strictly made. Merleau-Ponty also acknowledges the reversibility of subject and object, but would not accept a situation in which the distinction between them itself disappears. In Nishida's pure experience, however, there is no thing or self, only the becoming of the real cosmos. Nevertheless, while Nishida thus explains the pure becoming of the whole reality, he also insists that the unity of pure experience is intrinsically and spontaneously articulated. In his own expression, the unity is differentiated and developed into various dimensions through contradictory collisions. This is essential for the unity of pure experience for Nishida. In the previous example, it is clear that it is only when a person is selflessly climbing up rock face that he or she manifests his or her past climbing and training experiences anew in the present physical exercise. So, in Hubert Dreyfus' expression, no matter how absorbed in the pure experience of the present, it is precisely this absorption that is articulated in a diachronic context. Moreover, insofar as one moment is distinguished from another by this temporal articulation, pure experience, while possessing the absolute unity of the real cosmos, at the same time contains from the outset a resistance, in German, Widerfahrnis, a contradiction and division between moments. Nishida believes that the distinctions commonly made in Western philosophy, such as nature and spirit, or thought and will, are required for the resolution of such contradictions and are only established in this way. However, the reason why the moments are in conflict with each other in such a way is that they are based on the unity of the real cosmos, without which the meaning of contradiction would not be possible at all. Moreover, the distinction between the regions of entities, such as nature and spirit, arises only to resolve the contradictions in pure experience. So they essentially exist towards the unity of real cosmos. What then is the relationship of pure experience to the phenomenological concept of the world? There are 3 points. First, Nishida is closer to phenomenology than to Kant, in that the world as a unity of pure experience is not outside the realm of experience. This is because for Husserl too, and unlike Kant, the world as transcendental idea is within the scope of phenomenological experience. In the well-known example, the Abschattung perspectives, I don't know, so how to say it in English. So Adumbration, okay. So, okay, of a cubic object changes infinitely and uniformly, but the cubic object with its whole series of Abschattungen is perceived here and now. Secondly, however, whereas Husserl takes the world as a uniformity of the continuum of appearances, Nishida would argue that the pure experience is more fundamental. This is because for the normative assumption that appearances are uniformly continuous to be possible, such assumption to be possible, the entity that bears the appearance continuum must have always already been experienced as a fact prior to this appearance continuum. If this fact has never occurred, there is no empirical motivation to understand the meaning of being uniform. Thirdly, with regard to the openness of the world, which is the subject of my talk, pure experience has an ambivalent relationship. On the one hand, pure experience has openness in the sense that it brings new moments to experience, since it creates regions of reality such as nature and spirit through the dynamism of the divisions inherent in itself. The only regions Nishida mentions are nature, spirit, thought, will, but he does not claim that there are no other real regions. But on the other hand, pure experience, while founding the regions of reality, pure experience is itself the reality par excellence, since the regions of nature and spirit arise from the division of the unity of pure experience. It is clear that both are included as a moment in the all-encompassing reality of pure experience. The relationship between pure experience and each region is probably closer to Hegel's positioning of nature and spirit within the movement of the absolute self-knowledge, rather than Spinozistic relationship between substance and absolute. This itself is interesting as a model for explaining the reality of regions of entities. Laszlo Tengey says that the reality of nature is reconstructed retrospectively from the perspective of transcendental subjectivity. Nishida, on the other hand, would say that nature and spirit are real insofar as they are positioned in a cyclical relationship, division, and recovery of the unity of pure experience. Nevertheless, in any case, this reality par excellence cannot be said to have openness in itself, since it fundamentally presupposes unity. Second section. Let us now examine the place as a new world concept in the context of the press article of 1926. Like hell, the term was borrowed from Cora in Plato's Timaeus. However, while hell saw Cora as self-withdrawal, Entzug, which constitutes the openness of the world, Nishida's conception of cola is not a dynamism like that of withdrawal. Nishida uses mirror as a metaphor. The mirror reflects all things without its own content. In the same way, the place as nothingness just makes all entities appear. Nishida describes place as follows, I quote, "The knower must encompass what is known, or else it must mirror this within it. To have a subject-object unity, no subject and no object must mean only that the place becomes a true nothingness, a mirror that simply mirrors it." End of quote. The knower mirroring the known refers to the structure of self-awareness, jikaku, which Nishida at the time saw as a form of knowledge, mirroring the self in the self. Translated into the language of phenomenology, this mirroring is the very facticity that the correlation between the act of consciousness and the object is established. Nishida believes that it is only when the object is placed within the fact that an intentional correlation is established. In other words, only when it is mirrored can this correlation be established in a meaningful way. Moreover, this facticity becomes the knower in the sense that it is the starting point from which the intentional experience can thus be understood as such. Of course, this facticity itself cannot be identified as any kind of reality because it is neither pure ego nor intentional object. They are what is known through reflection for Nishida, and I think also for Heidegger. Since it is not real in itself at all, it can only be a mirror that mirrors all that is real and is itself true nothingness. As you may have already anticipated, this place of nothingness is a concept developed from the fundamental unity of pure experience that we have just seen. The development from pure experience to place arose from confrontation with the epistemology of the time, such as Neo-Kantians, which I will not go into here. Let us take up Nishida's metaphor to grasp the concept of place, borrowing a metaphor from the American philosopher Josiah Royce. He describes a situation in which a person within the UK draws a complete map of the UK. So please imagine yourself in this position. Of course, you can draw a precise map of Britain in your apartment in Coventry, for example. The reality of the UK emerges from the movements of your hand as you draw, so like this. But as you yourself are in the UK, you must draw yourself into the map. In the end, you must draw the movements of your own hand, which is drawing the map here and now. Needless to say, here you are in an infinite regress, drawing hand, trying to draw hand, trying to draw hand, trying to draw hand, and so on. In the same way, place is the absolute origin from which the real, whether the subject or the object of a conscious act, the real shows itself, but is itself a place of nothingness, which is never real. Contrast this conception of the world as a place with Heidegger's conception of the world in his so-called metaphysical period. In his winter term 1929-30 lectures, The Fundamental Concepts of Metaphysics, Heidegger defines world as the manifestation of the entity as such and as a whole. So in German, die Offenbarkeit des Seienden als solchen im Ganzen. I explain this definition briefly. Heidegger at that time extended the transcendental project of being and time by defining the entire relationship between the entity as a whole, das Sein im Ganzen, which is the primordial nature into which Dasein is thrown with its corporeity and historicity. And in turn, the entity as such, Seiendes als solches, that Dasein understands as being about this nature. the dynamic relation between the entity as a whole and the entity as such is called metaphysics. This definition of world therefore refers to the very facticity that Dasein thrown into the primordial nature still understands the being of the whole nature, such manifestation of facticity. It is clear that Heidegger's world is close to Nishida's place in that it focuses on the facticity of the opening of the mutual relationship between man and nature. Ultimately, however, their philosophies differ essentially, and this is where the specificity of Nishida's philosophy on the openness of the world is derived. This is the difference over the relationship between the real or real things and the world. For Heidegger, the openness of the world withdraws entity from the entity and conceals Verwirkt itself. In contrast, Nishida's place is a nothingness that is not itself an entity, but is always inextricably linked to the entity, like two sides of the same coin. The place does not conceal itself, never. For Nishida, the countless entities mirrored in the place becomes a mirror image that embodies the facticity of the place. To use Royce's metaphor once again, when one falls into infinite regress by trying to draw the hand that draws the map, each of the infinitely layered depictions of the hand, so infinite regress of depiction, so the depictions of the hand still represents the drawing hand itself as a mirror image. In this case, the mirror images and the mirror are not identical, but the mirror neither conceals nor withdraws itself from the mirror images. As is well known, the duality of clearing and concealment, so in German, Richten and Verbergung, is the basis of the late Heidegger's concept of being in general, and the premise for his interpretation of the history of being and nihilism. But this characteristic of Nishida's place naturally spill over into his interpretation of nihilism. This consequence was developed by Hajime Tanabe and Keiji Nishitani in the post-war period, but I will omit it here. Now, if we look at place as nothing that is inextricably linked to the real, the problems I pointed out about an inquiry into the good could be solved. Because place is not real, place cannot have a closed unity in relation to the real things. In this sense, place is absolutely open. However, the openness that phenomenologists put into the world concept is not here. In Heidegger's and Hell's concept of world, the movement of self-withdrawal creates room for the new appearance of the real things. So one can speak of historical openness for the real things. In contrast, Nishida's place is only a mirror, so it is inextricably linked to the mirror image and cannot open up room for the mirror images to be historically transformed. As I will introduce Hajime Tanabe's criticism of Nishida, it seems that whatever Nishida's own intentions, the world as place, by being detached from concrete reality, relinquishes its connection to our concrete history. Third section. Finally, I will discuss how these issues are tackled in the context of Nishida's The World as Dialectical Universal, 1934, one of the major works of his late philosophy. First, as a background of Japanese philosophy at that time, I will cite a critique of Nishida by Hajime Tanabe, Nishida's successor at Kyoto Imperial University and a master of the Kyoto School. I quote, "To internalize all transcendent objects by means of the self-awareness of absolute nothingness as Nishida did, and to encompass everything in the universal of self-aware determination, and also as Nishida did. To internalize and to encompass belongs to a religious experience that is beyond the reach of philosophy, and philosophy should not be organized on this ultimate principle, but only has a relationship to it as a limit. End of quote. Nishida maintains that not only subjective consciousness, but also the real object that transcends subjectivity is only meaningfully established in absolute nothingness. Tanabe criticizes such a position for deviating from the realm of philosophical cognition and becoming a religious belief that can only be accepted irrationally. Since concrete flesh and blood human beings can only face and practically negotiate with the given reality in each historical situation, Nishida, who speaks of a place that encompasses the whole of reality, is performing a bird's eye view that is only possible for God. This is a consistent point throughout Tanabe's criticism of Nishida. Nishida also criticizes Tanabe's misunderstanding, and their relationship deteriorates. However, the concept of the dialectical universal shows that such criticism is one-sided. This is because Nishida integrates both the place of nothingness and the countless concrete realities of individual things into a single concept as two sides of the same coin. I quote, "The real world must be thought of as a world of mutual determination between the individual and the individual. It must be thought of as a self-determining world with a mediator M. It must be thought of as a self-determining world of the dialectical universal. In this, what is considered to determine itself everywhere individually and everywhere universally." End of quote. Here, place is no longer a concept that can be spoken of independently on its own, but only in the interaction of countless individual things, each unique in its own way. What Nishida calls the mutual determination of individuals is the way in which individuals relate to each other, retaining their uniqueness, Einzigartigkeit of their appearances. According to this, an individual can only understand the possibility of other individuals when its own existence is denied and limited, which in turn allows it to positively determine itself as an individual. This is an ambivalent event in which the unique and exchangeable individual still appears in plurality. But Nishida says that this event itself embodies the place of absolute nothingness. To borrow Gabriel's expression, the world here is not at all separate from the interactive dynamism of the realities in the myriad fields of sense, and it's therefore not the all-encompassing field that Gabriel denied. But still, it is in this very concrete historical dynamism, the dialectical universal, that all reality emerges. This circumstance, in which the interrelationship of infinitely diverse individuals and the place of absolute nothingness that mirrors them are identical, like two sides of a coin, is what Nishida calls the one and the many, Ichi-sokta, and what he brings to the logical expression, absolute contradictory self-identity. How does this relate to the phenomenological concept of the world? The position that sees world as a mutually determining dynamism of individuals is close to the concept of world in the so-called late Heideggerian philosophy of Ereignis, but the difference cannot be overlooked. In his 1950 lecture, The Thing, Heidegger speaks of the well-known fourfold field, namely the interconnection of the sky, the earth, the divinities, and the mortals as world. The relation to Nishida is to be found in the fact that the fourfold presupposes the duality of Ereignis and Entereignis, namely appearing and concealment, Richtung and Verbergung, in the late Heidegger's conception of being in general. Just as Nishida's place of nothingness is one with reality, yet absolutely separated from it, so Heidegger's fourfold is a manifestation of the entity amidst the duality of being. What is interesting about the Think lecture, however, is that each moment of the fourfold has an entity that loosely, of course loosely, corresponds to it, namely the rain cloud to the sky, the source spring to the earth, and the God who receives the drink and the human beings who sacrifice the drink. Of course, the rain cloud itself is an entity like the jar that Heidegger takes as an example of a thing and cannot be a world in itself, of course. Rather, Heidegger's description should be understood once again in Gabriel's terminology as an attempt to present the world concept of fourfold as the place of being where entities appear indirectly through the dynamism of the interconnectedness of the various fields of sense in which rain clouds and other entities are situated, respectively. In this respect, the fourfold resembles the dialectical universal, which consists of the mutual determination of individual things. It is particularly important that the world contributes to the new becoming of the historical concrete entities, such as the orbits of the stars. That is the example Heidegger gives in the Think lecture. But even in this dimension, or rather precisely because of this dimension, Nishida's alienness to phenomenology finally stands out clearly. In my earlier discussion of place, I contrasted Heidegger's world, which conceals itself, with Nishida's place of nothingness, which does not conceal at all. This is a contrast between Heidegger's duality of appearing and concealment and Nishida's absolute contradictory self-identity. This difference directly leads to a difference in the concept of God in both philosophers. As Didier Franck, a French phenomenologist, has pointed out, Heidegger's ambivalent concept of being, appearing, and concealment is placed in entanglement with a radical otherness called the last God, der letzte Gott. From this point of view, Franck points out that radical otherness, which can only be described as otherwise than being, as presented by Levinas, Ottoman Ketor, as presented by Levinas, is contained in the Ereignis, which is a duality of appearing and concealment. Expressed simply, the primordial actuality, which is always underfoot and therefore cannot even be aimed at, is constantly opened up to the primordial future, breaking through the identity of this actuality because of the character of the arrival that arises in each instance, moment. In contrast, in Nishida's absolute contradictory self-identity, the place is absolute nothingness without any fullness. But as it is called the eternal now, it has no future beyond itself and is inextricably linked to the individual things in each present moment. Correspondingly, what Nishida calls God is not the arrival of otherness to which the subject is passively exposed, but the emptiness that is simultaneous with and between the individual things, and that encompasses them. He calls this panentheism. This difference makes the openness of the world as a dialectical universal alien to phenomenology. What is at issue here is the openness of history, which is interwoven with the individuals. Consider the term eschatology in an article, Logic of Place and Religious Worldview, which Nishida wrote 2 months before his death. I quote, "It is clear from this that what I understand by eschatology is in a sense different from its Christian equivalent, as I do not consider it objectively and transcendentally, but immanently and transcendentally as the self-determination of the absolute present. At the depths of ourself, there is nothing. We are utterly nothing and respond inverse correlatively to the absolute one. This is a state that Banzan-Hojak describes as just like wielding, so this motion, like wielding a sword in the air." End of quote. Nishida criticizes Christian eschatology for having objectified the kingdom of God in a future that transcends the present. In contrast, the place of the individuals and the place of absolute nothingness are at the same time absolutely distinct, but in a way that they correspond inverse correlatively, like 2 sides of the same coin. The absolute present is not the eternal or timeless presence of Parmenides being, but the simultaneity of the correspondence between the mutually determining individuals and the absolute nothingness. Here, the famous metaphor of the Tang Dynasty Zen monk Banzan-Hojak is drawn upon. So, sword wielding circle like this in the air and the atmosphere itself. They are completely simultaneous, but there is no fullness of the Western metaphysical concept of being that Heidegger criticized. There is only empty nothingness in this circle. Nishida calls the situation in which each individual thing accepts such correspondence eschatology. This is the meaning of eschatology by Nishida. What kind of historical openness does this specific eschatology disclose? Nishida will not recognize the openness of Heidegger's other beginning, which cuts off the entire history of metaphysics, including the technological age. This is because Nishida does not accept and acknowledge the arrival of a fundamental otherness, a God, that could break the today's situation, which bears the genealogy of the forgetfulness of being. From Nishida's point of view, Heidegger would still be a philosopher with a Judeo-Christian genealogy. Nishida's eschatology, on the other hand, is not a total transformation of a continuous history, but is spoken of in an ordinary everydayness that is neither progressive nor corruptible in itself. He calls this in Zen Buddhist language the ordinary standpoint, ryōjōtei. When one realizes that the self is inextricably linked to absolute nothingness through religious self-denial, kenosis, one is still in ordinary everydayness. But this everydayness is a creative world in which individuals are endlessly becoming anew by mutual determination. There is no revolution of continuous history in this world, but all its space and time is filled with the creative becoming of the absolute present, which is itself empty and nothing. In other words, every individual in the world, including human beings, is woven into a web of mutual determination, linking the infinitely becoming past and the infinitely becoming future in its everyday banality. Nishida says that in the ordinary standpoint, we can think of the past without limits and the future without limits. The openness of this kind of history is the final tribunal that separates Nishida from the genealogy of the phenomenological concept of the world. Conclusion. As already mentioned, pure experience, the starting point of Nishida's philosophy did not come out of thin air, but was based on the background of the preceding philosophers of the Meiji era who accepted Western philosophy and speculated on their own alternatives. Therefore, it must be said that Nishida's concept of world and his philosophy as a whole, from pure experience to dialectical universal, is defined by the discursive situation of encounter, namely Japan in East Asia, which encountered Western modernity. Nishida's philosophy is not only a standpoint among the theories of Western philosophy, or an expression of Eastern spirituality such as Buddhism, but is a movement of thought that emerged anew in this eyewitness of encounter. In this sense, Nishida's philosophy itself is an intercultural phenomenon. As a Japanese of the 21st century, I, the speaker here tonight, have also had an encounter with Nishida's philosophy, and my own dialogue with him is still unterwegs, on the way. Thank you for your kind attention.
So thanks a lot, Yohei, for this very nice, very interesting presentation. So I stop recording, and you might stop. Want to stop the
Sharing
the screen